So survivor's guilt, Scott, especially in the veteran community, is often just kind of like shrugged off or
Mm.
brushed by in
Yeah.
terms of when people are sharing events that they went through.
Mhm.
And it seems like they don't really deal with the survivor's guilt or even know if there's a way to deal with it.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I found that as well. Sometimes it's seen as secondary to something like PTSD, or it's just seen as. I think it's hard for a lot of people to get their heads around. There's a kind of an open question that people that haven't been in combat or experienced the long shadow of war might have as to, well, why would you feel guilty? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. That's irrational. That was kind of my view as well when I first began working with veterans. Now I completely understand why folks that are bonded together as a team, that go in and take the same risks, that want to go in and want to all come out together, would feel a sense of guilt, a sense of remorse, second guessing, a sense of responsibility related to those brothers and sisters that don't make it back. And so I think I think it's really exciting that we could have a chance to kind of look at what it is, why it makes sense that men and women who've been in combat, not just combat, and anybody that's in the military during a time of war. I've worked with people that weren't exposed to combat that had survivor guilt. I've worked with folks that had secondary exposure to combat that had survivor guilt. It's something that is profound, and it's often, as you said, it's either brushed aside, it's not spoken about, or it's misunderstood, or it's seen as kind of an appendage of something else, moral injury, PTSD. So I would love to get into some of what I've learned, but I want to preface it by saying that I'm not here as a veteran. I'm not here speaking for veterans. I'm not pretending to be an expert on veterans. I'm a hospice guy. I've spent 34 years working with people who are dying. And early on in my career, there were a couple of veterans I had that really got me interested in figuring out how I can be a strong ally to men and women who are reaching the end of their lives, who are carrying things from combat that they never had the opportunity or really the support to unpack. And in a sense, as a hospice social worker, I'm kind of like the last responder. I see guys that carry things, and they've done a heroic job of stuffing it down in the vault, but it doesn't go away. And
Yeah.
then when they're near the end of their life and they're looking back on things, and they're trying to story this crazy experience of combat and how that altered their life, their sense of themselves, how it altered the way their life played out, and the way they continued to struggle silently often with things like survivor guilt, not knowing where there's a safe place to go, or feeling there's something wrong with them, like there's some flaw, or like or they were weak, or they were, they couldn't hack it. Why is my life so screwed up when Johnny's life would have been so great? I mean, he's such a good guy. There's all these different elements uh, that go into survivor guilt to make that, what I've come to believe is just kind of a really understandable phenomenon, but it's also a deep kind of pain that I see rooted in grief. And so we can go in any direction you want to. We can start by just talking about what is survivor guilt, and then, or we could go into that substrate of grief from which it comes. So I'm happy to go in whatever direction you'd like. Where would you like to start?
You know what? And that's why I love what we get to do here because I just had a thought
Mm,
and it's something I've never done before.
mm.
All right. And I'm probably going to even clip this and put it at the very beginning now. So, uh, thank you for everything that you just said and the disclaimer or whatever, the sharing. I know me personally, I've done counseling. I've done counseling with
Mm,
someone who did not serve, and I've done
mm.
counseling with someone who did serve.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, some of the best counseling I ever had was from a guy up in St. Louis who
Mm,
didn't serve. So
yeah.
I always reinforce that to people that service doesn't equal a, a counselor
Mm,
or a social worker or anything like
mm,
that. That there are incredible people out there
mm,
that can help
mm,
because, like you said, even started when to talk about non-combat related survivor's guilt. Think about the people, and I don't know about you. I've met people that were in the towers in 9/11,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the one lady specifically, when they made the announcement for them to, it's safe, go back up, and her coworkers went back up,
Mhm.
she was coming down. She missed the announcement, got in the other elevator to come the rest of the way down. So it isn't just limited to us. And because this is such a powerful subject that
Mhm.
I don't hear a lot about, I want to ask you something, and hopefully
Mhm.
isn't too
Sure.
challenging. So I just clicked in here. I'm dealing with it, or I'm not dealing with it.
Mhm.
I'm not, because we don't
Yeah.
deal with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's something that I tuck away into the vault, like you said, that doesn't
Yeah.
go away. What will staying in here and listening to this conversation for the next hour or so, how is it going to help me?
Well, I can't make any broad claims about how it's going to help, but I can tell you what my hope is.
Yeah.
My hope
Yeah.
is it's going to help because, for one thing, we do tend to just kind of stuff it down. We tend to suppress it. Well, I'm good. It's part of the military code, isn't it? You know, you stand firm, you face the future, you don't dwell on the past. If there's an obstacle, you plow through it. If there's emotions that come up, you don't want to be distracted. You stuff it down.
Yeah.
You put grief down in there. You put all these emotions down in there. You put maybe moral questions that come up in war. You put all kinds of stuff in that vault. And so if that vault is locked, that doesn't mean that stuff's not there.
Yeah.
That stuff may be pushing on. It may be causing, self-doubt. It may be causing a sense that maybe there's something wrong with you. It may be causing a sense that I just don't fit in this civilian world. I'm kind of out of sync. I just don't feel right. I kind of feel like, my life's whatever it might be, or maybe whatever is happening down in that vault, stuffing it down there doesn't make it go away. And when we name grief, when we name these feelings of pain over the losses we experience that we often never have a chance to kind of discuss or process, when we name that, we can kind of step back from it a little bit. And when we step back from it a little bit, we get a little perspective. And when we talk about it, we may realize, hey, you know what? This isn't just me. This is kind of normal. When you've been through something like this, when you love your buddies and you go in there and you're all taking the same risk, and that mortar just happens to go 30 feet away instead of on you, it goes on, that these questions can arise. That this doesn't mean that I'm going nuts. It doesn't mean that I don't have my act together. It means that I'm a human being that experienced these profound losses in a situation where I didn't have the opportunity or support to process that, because I had to keep myself and my buddies alive. And then when I came back, maybe the people around me didn't understand how close I was to these folks. They can't understand the context of battle. My grief is disenfranchised. My grief is suppressed or displaced. And so just think about that. When you think about the setup, you're in combat and you got to stay in combat mode.
Yeah.
And you got these buddies that you love. I mean, I didn't understand the bond that veterans had when I started my work at hospice. I've been doing it for 32 years. And I have a much deeper understanding. And I think about this guy, a nurse I worked with. Her uncle was in Vietnam. And when he got back, he became a long-haul trucker. He hadn't seen his buddies in decades. One day he gets tangled up in his rig in the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. He's on the national news because he winds up in the hospital. A buddy of his hadn't seen him in 30 years. He sees it on the news out in Ohio. He gets in his damn car and he drives to Delaware because his buddy needs backup. So when you get it, have a sense of the power of the love that you have for your buddies when you're going into battle. Imagine one of them takes a hit and he's gone. Or another one. These can be cumulative losses, and you don't have an opportunity to pause, to recognize that, to come together, to communalize that, to ritualize that, to tell the story, because you're under fire. There's threats coming in. You can't feel the intense sadness. You can't feel process the questions that come up. You don't have time for that. If you do that, it's going to be a distraction, and you and your buddies might get killed. So these are high risk kinds of losses. When a hospice patient dies, and they may have been bedbound for 2 years and they may be 80 years old, we do a bereavement risk assessment. And we look for red flags that will suggest that this kind of loss could be problematic. And you know what some of those boxes are? Was this person young? Check. Did this person die under traumatic circumstances? Check. Was the death witnessed under trauma? Check. Is this a cumulative loss? In other words, so we're going, does the person who's grieving have the opportunity to engage social support in a healthy, ongoing way? No, because you're in combat. It's just not going to happen. Does the person who's grieving have the capacity to access, support? No, because you're in the middle of it. You got to take that grief, and maybe cumulative grief, put it down and stuff it down. And then when you get out, maybe years later, you've got these losses in there, and you wind up back in civilian life, and people may not understand just how close you were to your friends. They may not understand the intensity of battle, the nature of cumulative losses. They may not understand the arbitrariness of who got killed. You're all going in, you all want to come out, and some of you aren't going to make it. And it can, and so when you love folks, and when they take the hit and you don't, and then you come back and you don't have an opportunity. So what I'm hoping is going to come out is, one, veterans are going to say, hey, wait a minute, man. When you think about it, that's kind of a setup, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a heavy lift. As a chaplain buddy of mine, Brian, he'd say, what the actual fuck? I mean, you're in this situation, you're taking these hits, you can't process it, then boom, you're back in civilian life. And there's this thing called disenfranchised grief, where people around you don't really understand the intensity of the loss. There's no, ways to kind of socially receive support for that loss. Our loved ones may be happy to see us, but they may not understand the losses. And so it's kind of a setup for all this stuff being down in there. And so when we talk about it, when we look at it like, hey, look, this is a hard setup. And so, if you're carrying something in that vault, if you're carrying this sense of a feeling, I should have done something, it was my fault, or feeling this heightened sense of accountability, responsibility, or if you're feeling like, you know what, I lost 3 buddies over there, and it had to be something. Maybe they took the hit, so I didn't take the hit. If you were wounded or something and you were on the sidelines and your unit took a hit, whatever it is, these feelings of, veterans tend to sometimes hold themselves to a high bar of accountability. And when you feel that sense of personal responsibility, and when you really want your buddies all to make it, and when they don't, the stories you tell yourself can start to feel really compelling. Well, I should have died with my buddies. It should have been me, not him. Or I could have prevented it. Or maybe it's, I could have done something different. I could have saved, whatever it might be. When you don't tell those stories except to yourself, and when those stories are, I didn't deserve to come back, or the life I'm living isn't worthy of the luck I had, or the sacrifice, the stories, if you just tell those stories in your head, they're going to start to feel real. And even if they are based on misassumptions, even if they're based on beliefs that you have that, it was my fault, or I should have done, or it should have been me, or, the life I'm living is crap compared to what Billy would have been doing. Those are stories we tell ourselves. And if we're telling ourselves stories internally and we're not sharing them with other folks, we can start to believe them in ways that really aren't healthy. We shouldn't have to do that. Veterans shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to come back and try to grieve in isolation. You shouldn't have to stuff things into the vault. And so what we're doing today is naming it, normalizing it. And my hope is that folks will kind of take a deep breath and think, you know what? That is a tough thing to have to do. And maybe I don't have to do this on my own. And maybe it's not my fault that my friend, maybe this belief that I should have died with my platoon, I should have shared the same ultimate, maybe that's a belief that I have because I love them. But maybe it's not necessarily something I need to put on myself. So we can look at some of these narratives. So really what I'm hoping is we'll just kind of normalize these feelings, and folks can take a breath and say, you know what? Maybe I don't need to be hypnotized by this story of it should have been me, or why. And if you're in a position of authority, I know like platoon leaders are especially susceptible to this kind of thing. Corpsmen the corpsmen I've worked with are notorious for they may save 5 guys, but it's the one guy that they lose.
Yeah.
That is their nightmare, or is their I'm a piece of shit because I didn't save my, and you may have these stories, if we don't examine these stories, they take hold and they can cause pain. And if you like I said, I've worked with vets on their deathbed and maybe haven't told these stories, and when they tell them, and I respond without judgment, without, oh God, what do you mean? And when I respond without changing the subject or without trying to deflect, and they don't need to protect me from anything that they've experienced, and we just kind of talk about it, it's really normal, healthy human beings in a savage, unhealthy situation. I mean, war is nuts. It's crazy. And we got this blueprint when we're, maybe you're in homeroom and it's your senior year and you've already talked to the recruiter, and 2 years you're going to be in the jungles of Vietnam or the mountains of Afghanistan, but you're in homeroom and you're just trying to get through your senior year. And you got this blueprint about, do unto others, thou shalt not kill, the golden rule. Everybody's safe. You got your future ahead of you. 2 years later, that's been shattered. Mm-hmm. And you've got these friends that you've known for maybe a year, and you've never had friends like this before. And the 20-year-old who thought he had another 60 years may die tomorrow. And some of them are. It turns your head around. And then, boom, loss. There's all the, and it accumulates. And then when you come back, and if you try to carry that, if you try to keep that in the vault, it's going to work its way into your life. Yeah. So let's just name it. Let's just normalize it. Let's just say, you know what, we're doing this together, and you don't have to do this alone. There's nothing wrong with you. And I don't like the way we sometimes pathologize. We talk about, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a real thing. It's an intense thing. I've got training in that, but the word disorder, the whole mental health thing, I mean, this is often the way normal, psychologically healthy, loving people respond when they've been put in this morally impossible situation.
Yeah.
They have cumulative losses. You witness these losses that are traumatic and bloody and savage. And I've had to build my trauma muscles, as we talk about in somatic experiencing. I've heard things that just hearing them are hard for me. I cannot imagine seeing them. I cannot imagine some of the things that people describe to me are hard to even hear. And I've had to train myself to hear them with love in my heart and steel in my back. But that's just hearing them. So I can only imagine in my mind how difficult, how much strength it takes to live your life when that has been down there in the vault. But it's not fair. It's not fair. You shouldn't have to fight that kind of a war when you get back from war. There should be opportunities to talk about this stuff, to grieve, to name, to tell the stories. And when you tell the stories of these people that you've lost, your connections, the things that you did together, for what they meant to you, a lot of times you'll start to, at least I will, and vets I've worked with, you'll start to feel this kind of guilt start to loosen as you get perspective on the larger context of the relationship. And you get perspective on, one of the things I like to do with vets, when and I see this because, you may be 20 years old when you're in battle, but then when you're 40 years old, you're looking back and that 40-year-old self is judging that 20-year-old self.
Yeah.
That 60-year-old, you're kind of reassessing. And I may get somebody that's like 70, 80 years old. And they're like, well, I should have done this, I should have done that. And I'm like, wait, let's go back to when you were 20.
Yeah. You
had a nervous system, and you don't have the luxury of making choices when the battle starts. You don't have the luxury of looking back and saying, oh, I should have. You don't do that. You have to, your training kicks in. So let's have compassion for that 20-year-old self that was in an overwhelming situation. When the bullets start flying or when the intel starts landing, you don't even know exactly what's going on. You just have to act. You can't form a committee and say, well, I think this is the decision we should make right now. And you look back, it's like, oh, why did I all that's just a mental game. Let's have compassion for what it was like to be a 20-year-old soldier who wanted to keep himself and his buddies alive and do his duty. And his training kicked in as best it could. And sometimes the training kicks in and there's fear, whatever. There's human stuff. Let's just bring compassion. Let's not make it's not just the feeling of the guilt or the trauma or the pain. It's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves in the pain. I mean, I don't mean, can I just keep talking? I don't want to ramble. If you want to, is it okay if I keep talking?
Yeah. I do want to, before you move on to like this.
Yeah. I want to give you guys just.
So something you said, and what was a couple of weeks ago, I was in Dallas, the Medal of Honor Museum, and when you were talking, I grabbed my phone and pulled this picture up because I don't ever want to misquote it. In the Medal of Honor Museum, there was a Marine from World War II, Joe Foss, and the quote on the wall, and it's like good size. I'll put it in here or something for the viewers to see. Those of us who lived have to represent those who didn't make it. And I want to say that might have came into my head when you were talking about purpose and different things like that. Like, why did I make it when they didn't?
Yeah.
And there is kind of a double-edged sword to that statement. That we have the responsibility, and then again, that's a heavy responsibility. And like you said, when someone is going through a rough time or they're struggling, and it's like, why did I come back to live this life whenever somebody else could be living a better life? And I mean, it's such a complex, convoluted, multifactorial issue.
Yeah. Right? I'm so glad you said that, because it is so complex, isn't it? It's not simple. There's so many different lines and layers. And that point you made is so profoundly on target with so many folks that I've worked with. That, it's a double-edged sword. I think of that scene in Saving Private Ryan, where at the end of the movie, Tom Hanks' character is dying, and he says to Private Ryan, "Earn this." It's a really powerful moment, and Spielberg catches that sense of wanting to honor the sacrifice that our buddies made, of wanting to live a life that honors the fact that we made it back and they didn't, that wants to be worthy of that sacrifice. But at the same time, when I see that scene, part of me wants to grab Spielberg by the collar and shake him. Like the idea that Private Ryan has to earn the rest of his life. He has to measure himself and measure his imperfections, measure his flawed humanity like we all do, against this heroic moment of ultimate sacrifice. And also against his imagination that's playing out what his buddy would have done. Well, I can barely hold down my job at the parts store. I bet Billy would be a father by now. He'd probably be working. So it's not just beating yourself up for every perceived flaw when these thoughts are spinning around. It's this imagination of, the wrong guy came out of that firefight. The wrong guy. And so it's so complex that part of the code of honoring the sacrifice of fidelity to those who have fallen, of that powerful impulse to keep them alive in memory. That's powerful. It's beautiful. It's honorable, but it can also be a trap. It can be a trap if we don't allow ourselves the grace to say, you know what, I did my duty too the best I could. I did everything I could to keep my buddies alive. Do I really have to justify that I was the one that got the lucky roll of the dice that day? Is it really my responsibility to live the rest of my life and constantly evaluate whether or not I was worthy of that luck, or of that, some people say it is, of that, whatever, however you see it. Maybe it's luck, maybe it's, but do I constantly have to measure myself against this idealized life that I believe my friend would have been living? And this awareness, and we all do it. It's not just vets. We all look at everybody else. They seem like they got it together, and we're very aware of our shortcomings. And so we're aware of all the ways we think we're screwed up, and like we're aware of all the flaws. And so we got to constantly measure that against, one, our grief and our awareness to the profound loss of our buddy and the pain it caused his families, and our sense of the ideal life he'd be living. I bet old Joey, he'd be lighting the world up right now. He'd probably be doing something good, and I'm over here and can't get myself out of the chair when there's a football game, and I'm half drunk by the end of the day, and so it's taking some of the good out of that code and leaving some of the ways in which that code can be a trap, can be a way that we kind of berate ourselves when the bar is so high. And again, veterans, a lot of them have this high bar as far as accountability, that I don't want to go light on myself. I want to make sure I measure up, and then we're human.
Yeah.
And if you're carrying this grief, if you're carrying some elements of trauma or post-traumatic stress or PTSD, if you're doing what a lot of veterans I've seen do, living this kind of almost double consciousness where something profound happens in war, you come back a different person, your identity changes, your worldview changes. Some of that can be really good, but some of it can be really kind of confusing. And then you're in the civilian life, and there's some things you can tell people, but there's often this kind of hidden world of experience. These stories that you really can't tell, or you feel like you can't tell people because either you want to protect them, you're worried people will judge you, you're worried you're worried people won't get it. So you kind of live this kind of almost a kind of a double life where some of the most painful and powerful and important things that have happened and some of the deepest grief you feel hesitant or reluctant to share. And sometimes there's damn good reasons for that, because people might not get it. But who can I trust with this? So living that with the kind of burden of that kind of double consciousness, to use WED, he was talking in a different context, but that kind of, these are the stories I can tell, and there's a lot of stories I can't tell.
Yeah.
And some of those stories we can't tell are the most important ones, and would be the ones that would be most wonderful if we in the civilian world could circle the wagons with love and safety and open hearts and say, tell me the story. Tell me the story. And there are plenty of us out there that want to be able to do that. So it can be hard to know who to trust. It can be hard to know who you can talk to. So you have to live this, almost a lot of us don't have to either put those stories in the vault, but a lot of those stories aren't in the vault. They're you constantly kind of push. And so all these burdens, that it's not just the burden of surviving war, but then where do you go with the stories? Where do you go with those paradoxical situations, Mike, like you just mentioned, that, of course I want to live a life that honors the sacrifice and remembers in a positive way and earns the sacrifice. Of course you want to do that. But one thing I often ask vets is, well, what would your buddy say to you when you died? What would he say to you? Would he want you to carry this? What would he say to you? And usually what they say is something like, he told me to let it go. He told me to live my life and don't beat myself up. I'll fuck ups now and then. And so sometimes I'll do this kind of empty chair, this kind of parts work with vets where let's have a you know your buddy. You knew him. Let's see if we can channel him a little bit. Tell him what you just told me. Tell him you feel guilty, that you feel like you let him down. You feel like you're not living up to his, whatever it might be. What do you think he'd say? I've never had a veteran tell me that their buddy would say, yeah, you sorry son of a bitch. You should have been the one to die. It just doesn't happen. It's usually, man, it's luck of the draw, man. We all knew the risks.
Yeah.
We went in. We tried to cover each other best we could. We were kids, man. We were doing our best. And I'm glad you made it back, man. Just let it go. Let it go. That's usually what they tell me. And that can be powerful to let that in. It can be powerful. And so there's all kinds of clinical stuff that we can do and counselors can do, but there's nothing like a loving presence. If you have somebody in your life that you feel like you'd like to share things with, but you're worried because will they get it? Will they judge me? Will they look at me different? Will they think I'm a monster? Or do I need to protect them because I don't want them to start worrying? Or will they throw platitudes at me? Well, you're just falling. But but there's always somebody out there that wants to hear. And we all have people in our lives that if we can figure out, who we can tell these stories to, that vault, the pressure in that vault begins to let off steam, and that pressure can really add weight to these stories that make our lives harder than they have to be. These stories of I didn't do, I screwed up. It should have been me. I should have died with my buddies. Those are stories. It's all just stories. And sometimes we tell ourselves stories about our suffering that compound the problem. I mean, I knew this guy. He had survivor guilt. He didn't have direct exposure to combat. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and he didn't see combat, but he had a tremendous amount of survivor guilt, and he had a lot of PTSD because before you can, he basically repaired choppers that had been shot up in combat, and before you fix them, you got to clean them.
Yeah.
Some of the things that he saw were just, there's a couple of things he saw that I'll carry the rest of my days, and I didn't see it. And so he had a lot of PTSD. He lived a life where he just struggled. He drank a lot. He couldn't hold down jobs, 5 different wives, that kind of thing. Felt like his life was just, and it wasn't. He was a good guy, that his life just got off track. He had all this guilt, like, all these guys, I didn't fire a shot the whole war. I didn't take any bullets. All I did was fix helicopters so other guys could go out and die. I should have been the one that died. I should have taken the risks. And he thought he was a coward. He thought he was weak. How do I have PTSD when I wasn't even in combat? What kind of schlep gets PTSD from cleaning helicopters up with the boy? And so it's not just the survivor guilt. It's not just the shame. It's not just the PTSD. It's his story about himself as he's struggling with that. I'm a fuck up. Look at this. What a weakling I am. How can I have PTSD? I'm such a cow. I wasn't even one. And so and these are all stories. Stories that are often driven by horrific things and traumatic things that we see and painful losses that we don't get to process. So another thing you asked about, what I hope comes out of this, Mike, is that we really start to recognize when we're telling ourselves stories about ourselves and our suffering that are not compassionate. When we're suffering, if we tell ourselves, "Oh, I deserve to suffer because what?" Or I'm weak. I must be a whack job. I can't hack it. Why? That's not a helpful story. It's not true. It's not kind. It's not compassionate to ourselves. And I know some vets out there like, I don't need compassion. And I get it. Again, that stoicism, part of the code. I'm not going to make. So even there can be a resistance to changing those stories and making them more compassionate. But I'd suggest to folks that you listen closely, not just to the stories that are driving things like guilt or shame or keeping you from your grief, like I just got to muscle through it, but the stories about the pain that you're experiencing, the stories about, you get to be human. And you get to be humans that have been in situations most humans are never going to be in.
Yeah.
And won't understand. And you've seen things that this guy, he was in World War II. I can tell you about this guy actually maybe at some point, because he's the guy that got me on the trajectory early on of interest in death. But he said, I saw more death in 3 years in the Pacific. He was a Marine than I thought I'd see in 3 lifetimes.
Sure. Sure.
And when that's true, we need to give ourselves lots of grace, lots of leeway to be human in ways that we get to be confused, we get to feel out of sync, we get to feel self-doubt, but we don't want to get stuck there. We want to recognize if the stories are doubling down on this sense that there's something wrong with us, or we don't belong, or we don't have a place in normal society, or people would never, if they really knew us, they'd reject us because it'd be hard. Whatever the story might be, beware of the stories we tell ourselves. Beware of the stories we tell ourselves. And again, sometimes go back to those buddies that didn't make it. What would your buddy say about that if he knew you were telling yourself the fact that you have PTSD or survivor guilt means that you're weak, means that you couldn't hack it, means that there's something wrong with you, means that you deserve to be punished. That's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
And when we don't tell those stories, we don't get to test them with people around. And they can seem so true. When you're telling the story to yourself, it's connected with an intense emotion, vivid experience, trauma that can be confusing, moral confusion, moral injury, spiritual dimensions that are problematic. That story can get more and more powerful. It can seem more and more real. And if we share that story and we tell it to somebody, and just the fact of saying it out loud and seeing ideally people responding with the kind of compassion that's warranted, or the listening presence. Oh, wait a minute. Wow. Let me tell you more about the story. Let me flesh that story out. Let me bring in elements of my experience that I've been putting. Maybe there's some positive stuff that you kind of focus on, sometimes the negative stuff. You lose some of the positive stuff. So what was it about your connection with Bill that made you so close to him? What is it about it? What did you two do together? Well, so were there, and obviously for the most part, we watched Bill's back. The fact that Bill died is not a fault, a failure on your part. I mean, these are conversations that you can have with people that can think and will listen and say, "Why? You really? You? Why do you believe that you didn't deserve to make it back? Why do you believe that? I don't get it. Help me understand that." And when somebody doesn't get it, it's like, well, why do I believe that? And which doesn't mean it doesn't go away magically, but the more you tell the story, the more you get an opportunity and just to talk about and reconnect with that person. There's a certain, the VA psychiatrist, Dr. Jonathan Shea, talks about memory and storytelling as having kind of a resuscitative function. He kind of keeps our buddies alive in a way when we tell the story, when we share the memories. And if we don't do that with anybody but ourselves, we sometimes focus on those things that are causing us the most pain, self-doubt, trouble, or the most traumatic elements, maybe at the end of a relationship when he's being medevaced out and you never see him again, or when his legs are gone, or when he's whatever. That's what stands. But what about all this stuff? What about the love? What about the camaraderie? What about the time you got pissed off at each other and then had to make up later on, and your buddy said, "All right, come on, you guys, shake it." Whatever. You lose this human context sometimes. And the focus can be on the guilt, can be on the violent end, can be on the suddenness, can be on that moment of self, and it makes sense. And trauma can fuel that. PTSD can fuel that. But in some ways, what I do as a social worker is just a kind of a sophisticated kind of storytelling, where I'm the listener. And I invite people to tell their stories in a different way that catches elements that might have been lost as their pain has led them to focus on certain things that have reinforced negative stories about what they did or what they deserved. Or as they've lost some of those memories because they've tried to stuff stuff into the vault.
Yeah.
And so, I can keep talking, but I'm going to pause, and because you guys are really the experts on that setup situation. It's kind of a setup to go in, to lose folks, to come back, and where do I grieve? How do I tell the story? So, I want to pause so either you can tell me how that lands, or tell me where you want to go in terms of the direction we go.
I think one of the best things that, and really this last part that you were talking about here, is one of the best things that I got out of the therapist I worked with in St. Louis, he was cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons I think that it's great to talk with somebody, and it's something that you literally just nailed during this conversation, is that third party perspective, or even second party perspective, where someone can make you look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Because we're in our own heads.
Yeah.
thinking, telling the story.
Yeah.
But then all it takes is that person you're talking with to say, well, what if you look at it from this way? Tell me what they
Right.
would think, what they
Yeah.
would say. And I think that there's so much power in that.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so much power in finding someone to talk with who
Yeah.
is good
Yeah.
and will prompt you and kind of encourage you to do the same, because it helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that. And in different contexts, I'd like to maybe respond to that. One is with professional counsel, and I'd encourage. I think it should be part of the deal that veterans should get a lifetime of, and the VA does this. I mean, obviously, but the focus is often on PTSD or moral injury. They're doing a better job these days with grief and bereavement.
Mhm.
But I think just having an opportunity to bounce things around with a third party that can ask questions that can flesh out one. What is, you mentioned CBT, the cognitive behavioral, like, well, why do you believe that? What's the thought behind that? What's the,
Right.
and some of these thoughts might be what we call cognitive distortions. But when we're just telling the stories to ourselves, we tend to reinforce them.
Yeah.
And then just saying it. And so professional counselors can be wonderful resources for ways to kind of get into that narrative, and also get into the ways that those stories live in our bodies, somatic awareness, mindfulness, that those stories can be reinforced by the way our nervous system has been rewired by war. They may know about all kinds of strategies, but also just there's power just to telling the story to a loving other. And you can do
Yeah.
that with your buddies, but doing it with somebody in the civilian world, doing it with a family member, or just somebody that you trust, or it just, the opportunity to tell the stories is just a healthy way to process our lives. We are storytelling beings, and if some of the most intense, the most fraught, the most loaded experiences, and the most in so much transformative experiences, if we can't tell anybody about that, then that's just a trap. That's just a setup. And I often find that it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, you guys know this better than I ever will. That there can be a lot of really good stuff that comes out of military experience that can be used
Yeah.
in this kind of healing journey. I
Mhm.
know guys that when they're facing their death, they're fully equipped to do it in a healthy way that they can attribute to what they learned in the military. This sense of discipline, this sense of capacity to deal with adversity, this sense to accept that stuff's going to come at you can't control. Maybe they've had this appreciation for simple things in life they wouldn't have had, they felt like, if they had been to war. Maybe they'd lived their lives in a way, like you said, Mike, that tried to honor certain values and things. So there can be a lot of good stuff that you bring from the military that can be incorporated into this healing kind of storytelling. But it can also mitigate some of the more difficult aspects of this, and survivor guilt's one of them, is those stories we tell ourselves about, you know, it shouldn't have been me. I didn't earn this. Or they took the same risk that I did. Why did I get the lucky card? I should have gone down with them, or I should have gone down instead of them. And so that's just, and I don't mean this dismissively. I mean this in a powerful, profound, sacred way. That when I say storytelling, I'm not talking about like in a little bedtime story. I mean, these are serious stories.
Yeah.
And so I think, I'd encourage folks who are thinking about, maybe I wonder if I should see a counselor. One, it takes strength to do that. It's not a sign of weakness. It doesn't mean there's something wrong, fundamentally wrong with you. It means that you don't need to carry it all by yourself.
Right.
You don't need to carry it all. And maybe you think, well, I'm going to tell my buddies about it, and you talk with your buddies, and that's great. But again, there's something about the perspective of somebody that comes from kind of a different angle. And even with our buddies, and I don't know, I'm not a vet, but a lot of the vets that I work with, there's even some things they won't talk with their war buddies about. Things
Sure.
around shame, things about
Yeah.
around, pain and sadness. You may talk, you laugh, and humor's a beautiful way to create energy for new storytelling. I use humor a lot with and I find veterans have the same kind of gallows humor that a lot of hospice people do. It's amazing what you can freaking laugh about when you're immersed in death. And at hospice, I'm immersed in death in a different way. Nothing like what veterans experience when they're immersed in a kind of a savage, brutal kind of death. As this overlay, it's not just the dying, it's the killing. And so that is a whole different ballgame. And I can't imagine going through that without having the opportunity to just kind of tell the story over time and to say things out loud. Does it sound crazy to you that I feel guilty about surviving? Why do you believe it? And when it doesn't, when it sounds like maybe you're being hard, getting that feedback it starts to change the stories. And if you're carrying it all by yourself, a story needs an audience to really come into perspective. It needs a listener, and if that listener is willing to let go of any stories they have, and to hear and to ask questions, that transforms things, and it can give you perspective. I mean, again, trauma is a serious. I've got advanced training in trauma. It's not just a matter of storytelling, but over time, bringing in other elements of, like you said, cognitive awareness, the ability to use cognitive restructuring. There's simple tools that I've used with veterans that seem to be helpful. I mean, for example, like knowing the difference between regret and guilt, because sometimes we confuse them. Knowing the difference between guilt and shame, because sometimes we confuse them. Well, something bad happened. Does that mean that you're responsible? Do you have to feel guilty about that, or did something bad just happen?
Yeah.
I feel bad about what I did. Okay, but does that mean you're a bad person? Does guilt have to go to shame? That can be helpful, and counselors have these tools they might use. One thing I use with guys sometimes, it was this is interesting to me. I see this sometimes. It was very strange to me at first when I started seeing this, but as veterans age, I've known some of them, that some of them, the enemy is always the enemy. I've worked with World War II vets that were in the Pacific, and maybe a doctor who's from Asia is like, there's always a kind of a trigger. But other veterans, as they age, it's almost like some of them develop a kind of empathy for the enemy and develop this sense of almost shared warrior brotherhood. And I worked with this fellow one time. The reason I'm going to tell you the story is I want to give you a tool that I sometimes use called the responsibility pie, which is a way of taking when you feel responsible, like it's all your responsibility. With this fella, he was in a tank battalion over in World War II in the deserts of North Africa, and he was in this particular battle, and he was the gunner, and there's a Panzer tank, and he hit. At the time, he said, I hit this shot and it was beautiful. And I saw that Panzer light up like a torch. And I felt this cold satisfaction that I'd done my job well. And I got those sons of bitches that had killed so many of my friends. And this is another thing. People feel things and do things and see things in war, and the kind of rage and the kind of anger, the kind of dehumanization, that's all kind of, I hate saying normal, but it's you're trained to do that.
Yeah.
And our 80-year-old self can look back on that and have some different ideas, but we got to remember that's the way it is. And he was like, I felt cold satisfaction. But then when he became an old man, he started to feel sadness. He started to feel like, those guys in that tank were just young men like me. They grew up and hearing this bullshit, Nazi Germany, they didn't know any better. They're trying to survive. And, they didn't get to have kids like I did. They didn't get to discover that they'd gone down the wrong road in certain ways like I did. They didn't get to live their lives. What kind of a freaking monster feels joy and hard satisfaction? And so we went back to that 20-year-old self. Yeah, that's what guys I've known. You guys know firsthand. I know secondhand. That's not out of the box. That makes perfect sense. Makes
Sure.
perfect sense. Absolutely understandable. I'd be surprised if you didn't feel that. But the 80-year-old self's like, what a monster. And we're talking, he says, I killed those guys. And I said, well, I killed those guys. You're the guy? You're the only one responsible for that? Yeah, I was the gunner. I was the one to line them up. I did it. And so the reason I'm telling the story is to share something that I found helpful, just a simple tool. And I said, well, would you be willing to do an exercise? Because I don't believe that's true. I'm not trying to tell you your experience. I'm not trying to talk to you. I get it. And if you're responsible, like you're the one that did this. But I have a belief that you weren't the only one involved in this. There's plenty of blood to go around. It's not on your hands. Would you be willing to do an exercise? So we did this thing called a responsibility pie. I drew a circle. And I said, that's the responsibility for those guys dying. Right now, you think it's all yours, right? Yeah, it's all mine. And again, that heightened sense of responsibility, holding himself accountable. You know, there was, like Mike, like you said, there's kind of a double edge here.
Right.
Because there's something honorable about that. Like, I'm not going to duck responsibility. I'm not going to make excuses. And there's something honorable about that. But he's overdoing it. I said, well, what about the guys in the other tank? Did they just magically appear? They were making choices. They were trying to kill you.
Yeah.
What responsibility do they have? Well, put a number on it. What do you think? 50%? Hell, not 50%. 10%. Like, oh man, that's too late. It's more. So he decided to give him 20%. So I draw a piece of a pie, and they got 20%. What about your buddies in the tank? I mean, yeah, you were loading up the gun, but somebody loaded the shell. You had a commander, didn't you? Somebody was working the radio, probably. You probably had, guys on. You had a crew. They didn't wind up there by accident. They're making choices. What responsibility do they have? 10%. Cumulative. He didn't want to give all of them 10. So we cut off another slice of the pie. What about the politicians that started the damn war? What about the people working in munition factories and communication and transportation? What about the folks that built the tank? What about the folks that pumped the war? What about the corporations making all this money off the bloodshed? And we started going through, not to make excuses, not to say, well, but by the time we were done, he finally was laughing. He said, all right, you little son of a bitch, I get it. And and all of a sudden, yeah, you got some responsibility. I'd never try to take that away, or act like I'm making excuses for somebody that has that sense of responsibility. But come on, man, there's plenty of responsibility to go around. And when we did that, I mean, we really were laughing at the end.
Right.
And it didn't take away that code of I'm responsible for my choices. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm going to own what I did. But let's own what the 20-year-old did, not what the 80-year-old thinks he did.
Sure.
And let's have some perspective on this. You don't need to carry all this on your shoulders. It's not on you. And there's a larger context as well that goes into the whole, because World War II, most of the guys I worked with are, they had the core belief that this really needed to be done.
Right.
And so there was a clear mission with a moral justification. So how does that play in? I mean, that wasn't the Vietnam veterans I work with have a little more complex time. That's not always clear of a narrative. They were set up in totally different ways. And
right.
I feel so privileged to have started this work in 1992, where I feel like I saw that whole generation, World War II, Korea. I got to hear the stories of those warriors. And I got to create hopefully a space that was safe enough for them to unpack what they wanted to. But now, we're getting the veterans from the Vietnam War. I'm so glad to be able to be a part of this work, because I have a real strong intention to do the best job that I can for a generation of warriors that are dealing with the same kind of issues, with the trauma and the survivor guilt and the disenfranchised, unexpressed grief and all that stuff. But there's the cultural narrative, the nature of the warfare, the nature of the combat, the nature of the deployment, the free fire zones, who's the enemy, that's so different. So The whole, I expect that, these issues, the issue of survivor guilt it's, and I work with World War I veterans. I started in '92. They're still spinning them around. These issues, your warrior ancestors have chewed on these issues. They share that kind of arc as they've lived their lives of struggling with these issues and hopefully chewing on them in ways that they use them to transform their lives, to become deeper and more whole and more human. Because there is such a thing as post-traumatic growth. We talk about post-traumatic stress,
Yeah.
but when you address the understandable underlying trauma, that can actually unleash creativity, insight, compassion, empathy, spiritual dimensions of understanding. That trauma can become a source of growth, and that almost only happens when you have help. Now, you don't need. Some guys may be saying, "Well, I don't want to talk to anybody. Why would I do that? That just makes me feel worse." And there's something to that. Sometimes when you start talking about what's in that vault, it can feel worse at first.
Sure.
It's not that it actually feels worse. It's just that you're feeling it.
Mhm.
And what I liken it to is I grew up in the North and it got cold in the wintertime, and I'd go out in the snow and I'd come in freezing. And my mom I'd be a wonderful mom. She's still alive. She's still very solicitous of our protection. I'd come in and "You're going to get frostbite." It was always frostbite, and she'd take my hands that were frozen and she'd put them in warm water. And instantly, whenever she did that, it hurt more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, why did I do that? And then after a minute,
Feels
okay.
good.
And
Yeah.
so if you're saying to yourself, talking about this stuff, it's just going to make me feel worse. It may feel like that. I get it. Totally get it. Sometimes when you start talking about what's in the vault, it's like, oh, do I really want to feel this? It can feel like it's worse. It's really just tending to what's in there. And so that's one thing I'll say. The other thing is that there are ways to heal that involve solitude, that involve nature. I've known a couple of Vietnam vets that said they were saved by poetry, said they were saved by writing. Sometimes you can heal in terms of a sense of spirit. So there's different avenues. If you're saying to yourself, I want to talk to somebody right now, that's totally cool. I would never try to twist somebody's arm.
Right.
But I would suggest that there may be other avenues. Some guys find that, if you want to tell the story to somebody and you like nature, go out in the woods and sit by the water and tell the stories to the ducks. If you like to sing songs, if you write lyrics, think about writing something. Bring it into creative expression. Writing. If you write poetry, if you journal, if you like to exercise, sometimes you can turn that into a kind of a meditation. I've known guys that they go out on long runs, and you can use that long run to process. You can use that long run to have conversations with buddies that aren't there. You can use that long run to get in touch with your deep self, to have a conversation with those parts of you that feel like you did something wrong, or you feel like, why can't I get my act together? I'm still feeling this. And so, there's a school of psychotherapy called internal family system. The idea is that we have this kind of internal family. There are parts of us that carry pain, and we try to hide from those parts, but they have ways of kind of coming up and making their presence known. There's other parts that we could call them firefighters, that kind of like, if you have a part that's carrying this deep shame of having survived, or this sense that you're not worthy of it, you may try to distance from that part by drinking, by distractions, by anger. Those are those firefighter parts, the ones that get pissed off or distraction, or the ones that shut down, kind of numb out. And so the idea is that we have this inner family, and there's parts that have wisdom. There's the deep part. So I liken it when I'm talking with veterans. Sometimes I liken it to an inner platoon. Now you may have a part that doesn't want to be here, that wants to end it, wants to die by suicide. Okay, that's a part. That's a part that's carrying pain. That's a part that's thinking, it's hopeless, it's pointless. I want out. I'm gonna hit the eject button. That's the part that maybe says nobody cares, nobody give a shit. That has all these thoughts. That's a part. But you have other parts that have some wisdom. You have other parts that have strength and discipline. You have other parts that know how to engage. You have other parts that have, and so what I encourage folks to do is to be aware of that part, for example, that doesn't want to live, that wants to die, and not let that part lead the platoon. You don't want to let that part walk point, right? You don't want that part being in command. You don't want that part, use a Vietnam analogy, holding the big M60 that day.
Yeah.
You might not want that part working the radio. You might want a part that knows how to engage. And so being aware that this is a part of me. Now, how can I get in touch with that deep self, that part that has wisdom, that has a sense of clarity about, what is and isn't in my best interest. Sometimes trauma can separate ourselves from that deep self. There's a trauma therapist, Peter Levine, who says that trauma can sever us from the sense of our inner goodness. And the challenge of trauma therapy is to reconnect ourselves with that sense of inner goodness. We all have it. And so what I encourage people to do is to try to get to know some of those parts. I got this part that really gets overwhelmed, really gets mad, that doesn't like to be in crowds, that gets anxious. But I also have these parts that really knows how to take care of business. I've got these parts that is really kind of savvy about sizing things up. I've got these parts that really people can lean on. These parts and so get to know all your parts. And if you find that the parts that are driving, that are leading the platoon, are those parts that are like, man, I just don't want to be here, or I'm never going to fit in, or you're never going to make it. It's time to check out. Okay, there's nothing. Those aren't bad parts. Those are parts to carry pain. But get in touch with that. Sometimes when I'm talking to people who are talking about committing suicide, I'll ask, is there a part of you that doesn't want to die? Well, maybe a little part. Well, tell me about that part.
Yeah.
What does that part know that this other part maybe needs to hear? And so again, it may sound abstract, this idea that there's parts. It's really just, where's your center of gravity? And you don't go through combat. You don't survive boot camp, for crying out loud, much less combat, without having some core strengths, without having the capacity to handle adversity, without having the ability to meet different people in different situations, to make connections, to function as a team, to move forward. So figure out what your inner platoon, how it's going to be, what the responsibility is going to be. Maybe you take that part that feels disconnected, or feels like it's never going to fit in, or needs to die, and just put it somewhere in the middle. Shelter it. Give it some attention, but don't let it lead the platoon. And so
Yeah.
I don't want to just keep rambling, because I'm really interested in your perspective and what you'd like to reflect on now. But I mean, we could talk all night about stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage folks to find your channel, to begin moving toward giving yourself the right and permission to begin to process and tell the story, and to bring some compassion to yourself, and to not take too much of that responsibility pie on your shoulders. Yeah, and it's good to be accountable, but don't do a number on yourself. You've already been through it. Don't do a number on yourself.
One thing that I would love to say here, and I've said this before, and definitely say it again because it's very appropriate here for this conversation, is there are people, like you said, who are listening, and they're like, oh, I've tried talking with somebody, or I've done this, or I've done that. So for that, I love the fact that you were talking about doing things solo. I mean,
Yeah.
I have a bachelor's and
Yeah.
a master's degree in psychology,
Mhm.
and those are things that it's always just kind of been more towards the counseling.
Yeah.
And so finding different ways
Yeah.
to handle business and do things
Yeah.
And then to reinforce something that I always say, if you went to a doctor with a broken arm and
Yeah.
the doctor did not fix it, would you not go see another doctor? Like,
Right.
not everybody is right for everybody. Not
Right.
everybody's going to be the perfect fit with one another.
Right.
So I always encourage people that if you did not have a great experience, like
Yeah.
I'm sure the vast majority of Americans, maybe even people in the world, have
Yeah.
had at least one bad experience at Starbucks, McDonald's, you
Right.
name it.
Right. Right.
Did you never go back? You know, like, oh
Yeah.
man,
It's true, and maybe it just wasn't the person that there was a good chemistry. Maybe
yeah,
try again, take another shot, and also use these multiple channels. I mean, like I said, you can begin to move toward healing some of these things just by tapping into your own creative expression, or if you have spiritual beliefs, tap it into the energy of the transcendent. You can begin healing in your relationship with dogs and animals, and that tactile, unconditional love that you can feel and express. That's that inner goodness. Anything you can do to connect with that. Again, I mentioned poetry. I mean, I can I read you a poem? Do we have time to do that? How are we doing on time?
yeah, we got time for that.
I want to. The reason I had this here, just in case it made sense. There's a volume of poetry I sometimes use with veterans, particularly Vietnam veterans. And I know some people thinking, "Oh God, this guy's going to read poetry." It's not that kind of poetry. This guy, H.C. Palmer, he was a battalion surgeon in Vietnam. He saw some shit, and he's a brilliant poet. He's also works with veterans. He's also a really wonderful guy. I used to swap messages before COVID, just kind of talking poetry or swapping stories about working with older veterans as they encounter the sometimes overwhelming, not always friendly seeming healthcare system or other system. And so, but he wrote a volume of poetry called Feet of the Messenger, a lot of poems about Vietnam. And there's several poems that I go back to if I'm talking to a vet, particularly from Vietnam, if they seem open to a poem. I don't push poetry, but there's one he wrote that speaks to survivor guilt. And I'll read it to you, not to flesh out our conversation about survivor guilt more, but to give you a flavor as to how just simple creative expression can be part of the healing process. Because the poem is so beautiful and poignant, but it catches to me survivor guilt in a way that sometimes when I read this poem to veterans who are feeling this kind of pain, it's almost as though you can feel something beginning to beginning to shift.
Sure.
So it's a short poem. It's from a series of poems called Five Notes for More. This is the fourth note. And if you want to cut this when you do the post, that's fine. Remember that the Vietnam, the big granite wall in Washington D.C. Those names are inscribed chronologically at time of death.
Right.
So if your unit takes a serious hit, those guys are going to show up on the wall together.
Yeah.
Now this is from a real. This is a real event. This is not him imagining this. So this poem is about something that really happened. It speaks to survivor guilt, but I'm reading it now because it speaks to a way of beginning to get insight and to tap into that creative self that can shift those stories. A helicopter crash near Ben Cat. Ed Lenhoff, the Huey gunship pilot, the only survivor. Last week, he was arrested for chiseling the wall next to the names of his crew members. The Washington Post wrote, Mr. Lenhoff was taken into custody as he was defacing the Vietnam Memorial Wall with a mason chisel. Fortunately, park rangers arrested him after he carved just one letter. Eventually, after correspondence with the crew's families, the Park Service determined to leave the chiseled L on the right margin of panel 30E, line 16. So, and a simple poetic expression of the kind of pain that would drive a helicopter pilot to this wall to begin to write his name next to the names of his buddies. Now, it speaks to survival guilt, yes, but it also speaks to a profound kind of healing storytelling and sharing. So if you don't want to talk to somebody, I'd encourage you to do it anyway. If you went to somebody you didn't click with, like Mike said, try somebody else. But if that feels like too heavy of a list, find another way to begin moving in that direction. And for some people it's poetry, for some people it's reading memoirs, some people it's going, some people I've talked with, it was martial arts and kind of getting grounded in this kind of center and gathering strength in a way that's focused and controlled and measured. I mean, anything can become a meditation toward healing. And once you have one that feels right, maybe you work your way toward that counseling, or you talk to somebody that's not a counselor and share the story. So again, I love being here tonight, Mike and Neal, but I feel like I'm just running my mouth. I don't want to keep talking. So I'm going to pause and let you give some instruction. I don't know where we are in terms of the time limit, or if there's other things you want to talk about.
If I could, man, it's we covered perspective and different angles. I think just speaking for myself, and I don't want to make it like a story about me. I don't care about my own story, and I'm not going to be presumptuous in saying that this is the way that every veteran feels, or even most veterans, they feel this way. But just for me personally, I think one of the best things that I ever did for myself was let go of, oh, they'll never understand because they weren't there. They didn't do it. Let that go. I took on the mindset that it's unfair of me to expect them to understand. It would be unfair of me to expect that of anybody who hasn't been there and done the same thing. With that, if they are genuinely interested, and that's when I found the conference. What was it, 2013 on YouTube? And I heard you, I was like, wow. I was like, this guy wasn't even in, but it sounds like he could have been right next to any one of these veterans. You just seem to, I would have found you if I didn't take on that mindset. I don't think I would have ever found that video, honestly. Mm-hmm. I just wouldn't have cared to look for it. But with taking on that mindset of it's not fair of me to expect anybody who hasn't done that to ever understand it.
Yeah.
I found somebody such as yourself, who has this enormous amount of empathy and this unique perspective. It's kind of rare, I think kind of rare to find. I'd like to say that it's not, but I honestly think it is. I really do. But I just wanted to put that out there, Scott, and really, I can't thank you enough, man. I'm in awe at everything. I mean, I heard the conference, I listened to the whole thing. I've heard it maybe 3 times now, but yeah, just the angle that you and the perspective that you provide, I think it's going to be amazing for other veterans to hear,
Well, I so appreciate that, and I want to, if it's okay, give you a little feedback from my perspective. One, I'd say your story is important. It is important. And 2, I love what you said about, okay, I don't have to have confidence they're going to understand, but I'm going to take the risk and start sharing my story anyway. And that takes so much heart, so much grace, so much courage. And it's such a gift, because I didn't understand this stuff either until I started listening to veterans that did me the honor of sharing things with me that I didn't understand. And over time, I began to understand it better. And so to say to folks listening, it's such a beautiful perspective to say, you know what? I'm not going to expect them to understand, but I'm going to take a risk and share this. Now, you do that, and sometimes people aren't going to necessarily rise to the occasion. They may not necessarily be worthy of that trust. That doesn't mean you did something wrong. It doesn't mean any judgments or platitudes or deflections they want to make are real. It just means you knocked on a door and there was no one home. That doesn't mean you can't knock on another door.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean that the person that doesn't get it isn't listening and trying to listen. That was me for a long time. It's like, as I was, and if guys like you hadn't done me the honor of trusting me with things that I didn't understand, I never would have come to understand to the extent that I do. So thank you for saying that. Thank you for tracking me down. That talk I gave in 2013, I thought it was long gone. And so I really appreciate that. And but your story is important, and I'm so glad that we've connected. And so I'm glad I appreciate what you said.
You know, thank you. No, thank you, Scott. It's awesome. It really is. Oh, I think you're muted.
It reminds me of that night in Fredericksburg when you and I were sitting out in the gazebo with Jacob and Josh,
Mm.
and we shared some pretty deep stuff. Like we
Yeah.
got super deep
Yeah.
with guys who we knew decently well. But, you know, there was just something about, I don't know, that moment, the environment we were in, and to be able to share with these guys. Um, and then just the way that they were there for us, you know, it was like it felt good. It was therapeutic,
Yeah.
you know. And I, you know, I remember apologizing, like, oh, I'm sorry if I killed your buzz, or
Yeah.
sorry if we killed your
Yeah.
buzz, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know, like they were appreciative of us sharing that with them.
Mm.
And I mean, a little bit more context, they're both actors in the Pacific.
Mm.
So
Mm.
they really, you know, they were out there to be around military people and support and represent, and, you know, just finding the people. And I think that we get, you know, there's the people that, you know, we don't want to share with because it's almost like they're asking just to be nosy.
Yeah.
It is. And going back to what I said, maybe in the first 10, 20 minutes, whatever, it's just, it's very, very complex, but it's doable. Because even going back to like the first 10 minutes when we were talking about if we had a bad life and compared it to, oh, Billy, you know, could be living a great life. Well, God forbid we live a great life, right?
Yeah.
Because then
Yeah.
you're like, fuck, you know, I'm living this great life and my buddy died. Like, and then you're guilty about
You
that.
can't win that one, right?
You
Right.
can't win. You can't. It's a no-win scenario.
Set-
So I think that's why one of the things, well, my biggest takeaway from our time today, for sure, is you're just reinforcing the idea of what would so-and-so say.
Mhm.
And I'm going to go back to 2004, my first KIA. Well, kind of. It was complex. But the first person that I ever served with that we lost was in Afghanistan in 2004. And we had went to School of Infantry together. We came to the fleet together, a whole bunch of us, actually. Like half the company was guys that went to School of Infantry together and came to 3-6 together. And the captain did his little, you know, spiel, his speech, right? You know, he would want you guys to push on and, you know, like, you know, Marine Corps, hoorah, Chester Fuller.
Yeah.
And I just remember one of my buddies, and I don't think he even remembers it, but he was like, after the captain left and it was us just kind of sitting around, he's like, no, he wouldn't. He'd want us to like get wasted and smoke weed. Like, you know, and like, but he's not wrong. Like that's, you know, so remembering.
That's one of my
I think
favorite ones.
It's so powerful what you said, Scott, that like, what would they say?
Yeah.
You know, and they would not want us living the rest of our life
Yeah.
sad, miserable.
Yeah.
And we don't even have to speculate about that, because think about like the 96s that we did have with those guys, the weekends we had with those guys, like Memorial Day. I always think about Memorial Day. And you get so many veterans that are out here like, oh, we have to be sad for 96 hours straight. Like we can't smile. We can't be happy. You know, everything. We have to spend 96 hours at a national cemetery. Dude, Go back to when we were active duty.
Right.
What did
Exactly.
we do?
Yep.
What did we do on that 96? Including our guys that are there in that cemetery.
Yeah.
You know, we celebrated it. We celebrated the weekend. We celebrated the freedom. And I know, I mean, it's hard. You know, it's hard. But yeah, I think if there's anything that I could hope that everybody listening would take away from this entire thing, it was the same thing that you said. That you know, like just sit there and, you know, whether you're sitting out back or whatever, I'm a cigar guy, having a cigar, and you're just kind of feeling that, you know, feeling down or whatever. You know, what would they think? What would they say? What would they say to you right now if he was sitting over there in that empty chair?
Yeah. And also it's okay to feel down, but don't compound feeling down by judging yourself for feeling down, because we have stories about that. So I love the way you kind of bring in that larger part of the story. It wasn't just the moment of death. It was all the fun you had. It was all the other stuff you had.
Yeah.
It was the connect. It was the way you knew each other so well you could probably read each other's minds at some point. That's part of the larger story, and sometimes people feel like, you know, in grief generally, I work with people sometimes who feel guilty when they start to laugh, or they start to feel like they don't feel like they're entitled to feel good. Like some guys get attached to survivor guilt because they feel like if they let go of it, it means they don't care.
Yeah.
It means they're betraying their buddies. It means that it must not be important anymore. And so what you're saying, I love, because it ties into that sense of, you're not going to forget your buddies. In fact, you might actually remember more of those memories if you're not so overwhelmingly focused on this sense of guilt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know the hardest question is always why, you know, but I'll always bottom line that whole thing, the whole thought process of like why it happened to them, and I'm here without a scratch, and I'm getting to live this life. I always bottom line it with, well, they would want you to be happy. They wouldn't want you to sulk and be sad and depressed and isolate yourself. You know, and I know that's one of the biggest things with us is isolation and all that. Maybe some guys, I'm not going to lie. I just because I like my peace and my zen, I'm at the house a lot. You know, when I'm not working, I'll come here and I'll just sit here because it's peaceful. But I found peace in it. But all the other stuff, though, that can be harmful, you know, they wouldn't want that for us. I'll always say that. I remind myself every single day, you know, that they would want us to be happy. They'd want us to live well. We owe it to them to live well.
Yeah.
And
so that's that kind of deep self-wisdom that you're carrying.
And how crazy is it too? Like, and this is why we're so messed up, man. And like, and going back to another thing you said in the first couple minutes is that like talking about it normalizes it. Like we've got a group chat that probably like there 20 to 30 dudes thought that they were the only veteran that experienced IBS. And now we all know that we experienced it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, the more we talk, the more we share, the more that we realize we're not alone. We're not suffering alone. Like there's not shame in what we're going through or dealing with because we're not doing it alone.
Yeah.
But to add on to that, like how crazy are we thing, right? When you think about, right, we want, what is like one of the most number one things that veterans brag about or active duty brag about? They're like, you know, I would die for my brother. I would die for my sisters. Yeah. And then when they do, then we feel guilty that they did, you know, like,
wow.
It's just this crazy Rubik's
I never thought of that. I never thought of that.
Crazy Rubik's Cube puzzle, you know, I mean, like Forrest Gump, whenever he gets mad at Forrest Gump for saving him, you know, like dying on that battlefield, damn it, Gump, that was my birthright, you know. And so I want people to know whenever I talk with them, whether it's like in our Discord or whenever I'm doing live streams or podcasts, like you were talking about, it's okay, you know, it's okay not to be okay. We say that like, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay whenever I call or text you, say, how you doing? You don't have to say, all right, fine, okay. You can say, it's a rough day today, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. We're allowed not to be okay. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And it's okay. It's almost more, it's normal. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
whatever, like the VA doctor's like, what, you know, what, you got any pain? And I'm like, oh, just the normal amount. They're like, well, pain's not normal.
Yeah.
Well, to us it is.
When you're
right?
a vet, it is, right?
To us it's normal, right? Just like the psychology stuff. You know, this is the new normal. Right? This is our normal because of the things that we just chose to do in life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now, like, and again, when you talk about, you know, when we talk about like perception is reality.
Yeah.
Our perception is our reality.
Yeah.
And you can kind of perceive things. You can choose how to perceive things. I choose to perceive all the shit that we went through as it allows me to have, I wouldn't be, if I wouldn't have gone to the Marine Corps and done the things that I've done, I wouldn't know Neal. I wouldn't be having this conversation. You know, I wouldn't have been able to hang out with the World War II vets 2 weeks ago. You know, all these people in the Discord that we have, the veterans. And, you know, so I always talk about how it is an honor of a lifetime to be able to call you brother and sister. And you know what? We had to endure and witness and do and see shit that the humans are not born to handle.
That's right.
There was a cost for this life,
That's right.
right? And it can be a beautiful life. It can be a beautiful life, veterans together. You know, like we have, our Discord group is so incredible. I'm so thankful every day that I know those people, met those people, that this thing has started. We all had to suffer to be where we are now. And again, the guys that aren't around anymore, the girls that aren't around anymore, right? Their suffering shouldn't be in vain. And they wouldn't want us to continue to suffer because of us losing them.
Yeah. Whew, man, beautiful. Man, I part of me wants to not say anything and just let that wisdom just, but there are a couple of things I wanted to add, but a part of me wants to, you can just cut me out and end it right there. I'll just say a couple of things because that's the deep self I was talking about. That's that wisdom, that capacity for perspective. The couple of things I wanted to say, and I'm serious, you can cut this out and end on that beautiful distillation of the power of the wisdom to see things through the lens of a more compassionate, inclusive, holistic kind of lens, that part of your life is now in that context. But the two things I wanted to mention is, one, when you said that conversation at Fredericksburg, where you said, your thought was, I'm sorry to kill the buzz. I will tell you that some of those conversations I've had with veterans where they're sharing things they may never have shared before, and I'm down there with them just listening. I mean, I'm not experiencing, I'm just listening. And it's hard to listen to, but I'm listening. Some of those conversations are the most sacred moments of my entire life. So go ahead and kill the buzz, man. Go ahead and have those conversations. The other thing, Neal, when you say asking the question why, God, it's such a human question to ask, right? We always ask why. And I don't have any wisdom on that, but I know that when we ask the question why, we start to think, well, there must have been a way that we could have worked it so that didn't happen. There must have been a way around that. And Mike, to go back to CBT, it's like a cognitive distortion, that kind of counterfactual thinking, the hindsight error, that we think, we ask the question why, then we start to think, well, how could we have avoided that? How could we have had a different outcome? You couldn't. It's fucking valid, guys. You can't go back and find a way that everybody gets out alive. Your training kicks. So asking the question why, we all do it. We're almost wired to do it. But the trap of the why is to start thinking, well, what if I'd have done this? What if we'd have done that? What if, and so it's normal and human and in some ways powerful to ask why, but don't let why become a trap.
Exactly.
And so I guess I wanted to add that too. So
yeah, you can what if anything to death.
Yeah.
Literally, I'm just insanely thankful that we finally got to come together, and you just your words, when listened to and taken in for what they are, inspire, right? Us to think about things on that more holistic level. And that's where good things begin to happen.
The
So,
inspiration goes both ways.
You have to put that link in, man, to the conference too. It's phenomenal. It really is.
I will say I went back and listened to it after 13 years, and man, I talked fast. I was talking nuts. I sound like I jacked up on Jolt Cola or something.
As fast as you were talking, you covered a lot.
Like,
You covered a lot still.
Slow down, man.
Yeah.
but I'm so glad that we're able to hook up and do this. And there's this is not talked about enough. We talk about PTSD, we talk about all these different things, depression and stuff like that, but if it's like one of those things, right, that if you don't treat, if you only treat parts, some parts, and you never treat everything, that, well, then you're leaving things neglected,
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's like removing a cancer. You don't want to, it's kind of I hate to put it, but like, like you got to get it all. You don't want to leave anything behind, and you need to address it all, take care of everything. So definitely glad that we were able to link up and do this, and glad that storm didn't. I had a storm. Hopefully you guys didn't hear. That's one of the reasons I kind of kept muting, was there were some big time rumbles nearby. So
it was that way here too, man. So,
made it through the storm.
Yeah, we made it through the storm.
Made it through the storm.
So
this has been really fun, guys. I really appreciate you letting me cross the wire tonight.
Appreciate it. I thank you, so much for taking the time and talking with us about something that's incredibly important, and I feel like very, very frequently quite overlooked. And for all of you guys that show up, come on, listen, share, give us your feedback. Thank you guys so much. You're why we do this. We love you guys. And as always, honor of a lifetime to call y'all brothers and sisters. And until next time, Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.